Feel like your lecture actually put a lot of designer dads under a lot of pressure. Seeing what your dad has done for you as a child, and opened a lot of dimensions of how you could see and connect to the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I would be jealous, if I was a child and being exposed to these opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
When I first found out that I was going to moderate the lecture, I looked you up, and I felt that you are more accessible of a designer than many, and I feel like there's a way that you see the world that is connects us, meaning students, young practitioners. So I feel like you're quite popular among the youngsters. So a question that you asked on your Instagram was about how the education has prepared you for your profession. Was there something particular in that has helped you throughout?
Education is a bit of a hard topic. I think it's everywhere a bit different. For myself, it was that there were a lot of design courses, which I loved because I loved to design. But being prepared for running an office, it did not quite do the job. This was a lot of learning by doing, a lot of failing, because designing as an architect maybe is 5% of a building, what's really worth, but structuring a team and leading a team and creating an office culture where everybody is passionate to be a part of, that is much more work than designing. And I was not expecting that. Maybe even if we had a course which was called team management or team building, I wouldn't have done it because I was so into designing things. But I do think it is an important thing to teach, to really, because, I said it as a joke that architects were black because they are sad inside, but I really think that it is a very unhealthy profession we are in. It's not healthy to sit the whole day in front of the computer. So if the office culture itself is also desperate, it's the environment is even more harmful for your body and for your mind. And I think the worst thing is that if young architects lose their passion, or architects in general lose their passion, because this is one of the only things which is so great in our profession, that there's just so much motivation and energy in this group, in this field.
I know that you try to generate a lot of dynamics within your office, and that by you hold workshops and events that could actually help integrate collaborators and your staff together. What are some of the things that you do?
Well, we do a lot learning by doing. I think that there are offices who do it much better in a much broader scale. If you take a look at Bjarke Ingels, for example, how you feel that there is this drive of energy which creates the project, which is a very healthy thing to see. I think this is inspired by the startup scene in Silicon Valley and so. So we try to bring also this in, and it is not done by having a good paycheck at the end of the month. It is also not necessarily done by working on good projects, although that helps, of course, to be proud of what you're working. But I think mainly it is to have the feeling that you're working with someone and not for someone. To create this atmosphere that everybody is a part of the process, and not you as a boss. You go there and say, "Hey, you do exactly that. This is my sketch. Do that." And then when I as a boss see that it's not good, then I change 100 times until this is not I think this age of the master maybe is a bit over. I think all of this startup scene is teaching us like collaboration is the key to success, and to bring this one in an office culture, I think, is a very important part.
It's always interesting to look at the Western-Eastern relationship. And I think that I find, what maybe many of the people here find is that you're coming to China. I think that has a lot of influence maybe on your profession. And do you think that if you did not come to China, you would be where you are today?
No. No, for sure not. Because in Austria, it's a very competitive architecture scene. A lot of architects are, old with a lot of experience, and people are going to them. So to get to project, it would be incredibly difficult. I also could not, light that we have a big office in our background. I could not play YouTube at a personal meeting, maybe. No, but China for sure helped as a young architect, to get clients. And clients find you. So I don't think that in any way I would be sitting here.
Living and working in China, in Asia, how, and since for a few years, 5 years.
5 years altogether, yeah.
And then you moved back to Austria. How has that changed the way you view Austria and your...
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it changed me as an architect, because I think there are a lot of interesting things you can learn from each other when different cultures, different viewpoints, different educations in architecture come together. Like I said a little bit the difference about Western and Eastern architecture. So there are fundamental changes in how you look architecture from a cultural perspective. And to be in a constant communication with my partner, with employees, with the whole team, that you learn so much from that side, and you also can give back a little bit from your side. So I think this cross-cultural language influences then all of us. But I do think that you have to live somewhere else to discover how beautiful your home is. And I don't mean that as a demeaning way for in order to China, like that Austria is so much nicer than China is. But like there's a beautiful thing of the feeling of coming home. Like made experience somewhere else, but then building something up at home, what we are doing at the moment. So there is like it is a real it opens a bit your mind, and you don't see it like as narrowly as you always thought it, because Austria is beautiful, and when you live there for all the time, you probably don't see the beauty of it like if you have been to other places.
And you're not showing it on the slide, but what does your house look like?
We didn't build it by ourselves. I have maybe to go back a bit. Like my dad, he was I showed you he was a climber, but he fell 2.5 years ago, so he died on the mountains. So for us, this was then, for my wife and me, I'm a single child. We somehow didn't want my mother to be alone at home. So it was a quite quick decision that we moved home, but we were incredibly lucky that we found this house. I always had an eye on this house, and it was exactly at this time when we moved. It was for sale. So we bought that. It was from a German architect built in the 60s. And since then, we are renovating a couple of things. I think, as you say, the worst patients are doctors. I think the worst clients is yourself and other architects, because I don't know where I would have started in order to build my house.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I probably would have just built a box which is open.
Yeah, currently working on my own house, and I'm not wanting to have anything much to do with it, really. But we have a few questions from the floor. Maybe I'll read a few of them. The first one is, how could you possibly cutting back on working hours and still producing incredible large amount of great work?
Maybe this has two answers. So we try to keep a very small scale office. So I don't want to grow too large. So in China we had always around 8 to 10 people. Now they grew a little bit in the Chinese office. In Austria it's basically my wife and me, and some freelancers here or there. But we are building up our office now. But I don't want to go larger than 5 or so, because that gives you the freedom to say no to projects you don't want to work on. And this freedom is the most liberating thing, to get to a stage where you can say no to projects, because you somehow switch the table. So you are interviewing clients and not the clients are interviewing you for a job. And this makes everything easier. So I think the answer to this question is that we are fortunate enough to be in a stage now where we can choose our projects we want to work on, and that then gives us incredible passion for it. And that doesn't mean that we need to work longer hours. It just is a way of structuring your team in a way that it's more like a band, a small thing. So everybody is a kind of an expert or a specialist in its field, and you know exactly where you can direct the work to get at a certain time to a good result.
Actually, I would want to follow up on that. When you talked about the generalist and specialist, on the Instagram account. And how do you see yourself heading? I get the feeling that you're saying you're a generalist at the beginning of the lecture. I mean, where do you see yourself going from here?
I want to stay a generalist. I think there are, this play field of architecture is just so incredibly large. So maybe this is what I showed now. This is the interest we're having at the moment. But maybe in the future our interest is outside of architecture somewhere. I just started a startup for a food startup, for a product, which is based in Tel Aviv and Toronto. So it's doesn't have anything to do with architecture, but I somehow like to explore different fields, which somehow maybe come into this field of agriculture, architecture, and so forth. Yeah.
And that's probably how I think you can stay so accessible, which is to be a journalist. And to
maybe, but I think a lot of architects are. But I think in general, this era of the architect as this master is somehow over. When I was a student, I was studying under Saha, Patrick, and it's these are gods for a student, right? So how to access this bridge? It's impossible. But I think that now when we think about architects, it's more a collaboration. It's more about teams. It's not so much anymore about this one guy who is the head of the office, but it's more about maybe the work they are producing, and therefore the architects also become much more accessible.
What do you think was the best advice or the best kind of exercise that you learned from them?
I want to say I got this advice, but I didn't get it. But I somehow want to give it. No, because I was watching. I don't know why. I think with my nephew or so. I was watching this movie Up. Recently, it's a Pixar movie where the house is hanging on balloons and is flying off, and there is this dog. And this dog, he sees squirrels all the time. He gets so distracted, right? He goes left and right, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. And somehow, I felt as myself as a young architect. Because there are everywhere those opportunities which are popping up left and right and so, that you can really get lost in this. You have to be at this opening, you have to speak at this event, because some opportunity can arise from that. Then there is this other project, maybe you do it for not a lot of money, but maybe this can lead then to the next thing and so. So some, don't be that dog, right? Don't hustle to all of those opportunities. Like pick the stuff you really want to be in this field you want to be in, and then go in this direction. I think that my father said something similar, but I think this analogy with the dog was maybe nice.
Actually, there's a question about going in that direction. What is your thought on Starchitect that a bit more concerned about shape or form and the style of buildings?
Yeah, I think it's not so much the era of the star architect, but the start architect. So, and I really like that like architects, they can become now younger. They can start their office when they leave university and try to build something on their own, because this field is so big. So as I said before, I think the era of this master, of the star architect, might be over. And I think it's also good because we architects see this person as godlike, but for the outside world it looks a little bit weird. So because it doesn't connect to the outside, right? And other architects will never be our own clients. So I think we need to relate a bit more to that.
Speaking of recognitions. You've received so many awards, in the past 2-3 years. I mean, I get tired just reading through them. But is there something, one of the awards that you're maybe most proud of, or that you feel the value more?
Yeah, I mean, a big starting point for our career was the Emerging Firm of the Year award we got from Architizer. But in general. For oneself or for architects or probably for all of you, if I say we won this award, it doesn't mean anything, right? An award is like, you pay an entrance fee to be part of the award, and then in the end, a jury, like it's very subjective. It's not like I used to do ski jumping, and in sport it's something different, right? When you jump further than the other one, you are better than the other one. In architecture, that is not the case. And you mainly win awards for your mom, because something true to that, because your mom wants to brag about you, and she will never brag with like, oh, my son, he's now building a bamboo hotel. So this doesn't relate to her or her friends. But he won the Emerging Firm of the Year award. Like, yeah, he wins prizes. So mainly it's to make your mom happy.
Okay. I'm waiting for that moment. Another question, maybe from the floor. Let me kind of rephrase this a little bit. Okay, I think that this question is about imagining space, and maybe about creating a space that perhaps doesn't really exist yet, that you want to create. I mean, how do you go about that? Do you think that it depends on the technology?
No. I don't know if it's a bit of a tricky question, because also vernacular architecture, I think, plays a big role in that, right? Like building traditions, heritage of different spaces, and every country has different things. In China there is feng shui, in India there is vastu, and if a client comes to us and we are building accordingly to that, maybe. If he really or she really wishes for that, but in the end it's more like a selling argument, not so much as a design tool, because I think there are much more important elements which deals with what is the surrounding, what are the parameters of the orientation of the site, is it sloping down somewhere, like like where comes the water, is there natural wells, and so forth, right? There are always environmental impacts to a site which are far more important, I think, than those guidelines which were created over time that shape a space. So I think it is always like the environment that firstly shape the space or give the idea, but then of course tools and so are important to develop that. But I think it is on one hand it's a digital approach, but on the other hand it's always also a manual approach, like to build with your hands.
And maybe that's a way to be vernacular.
I guess so, yeah. I think that, well, I think a building should correspond firstly to a site, but then also maybe back to a culture, back to a tradition, which doesn't necessarily need to guide the whole project, but can find some influence in it. So not just architects are seeing the relation to their history, but also non-architects see maybe a little bit of their heritage in it again.
Okay. Well, it looks like our time's running out, but I want to end with another one of your questions from
What's my favorite movie?
Book.
Okay.
What do you do when you get a creative block?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
I'm sure this happens to a lot of people in this room.
Yeah, I just had one, like 3 weeks ago or so, for a competition, and I worked through it. Like I want to say that I go to the mountains and this one frees my mind and I get an idea, but it doesn't work. Like I think I go to the mountain to regenerate or to get strength again. But for ideas, I think I have to work through. I have to. I try to make iterations and then see what works and what not. And most of the time I work myself so deep into something that my wife, that I show it to my wife, and she said, "That looks like crap. Go away from that." And maybe if I find some distance, I can see it for myself as well. But most of the time I have to go to this point where there's no return. And then I have to try to do something completely different because I failed already in this and I know it doesn't work, so I don't go near that anymore. But mainly I have to work through it.
I'm glad you said that because I think that many people need to hear that. You know, instead of escaping to the mountains or the forest, it's quite easy to do.
Also sometimes escape to the mountains.
Yes, okay. Well, we can see that. All right, I'll ask this one last question. Okay, in your last project, maybe referring to the botanical building system, how can the residents gather fruits and vegetables for their food?
For their what?
Food, for food.
For themselves?
Yes.
Well, I think when you do agriculture on a small scale, again, new technology is coming in, right? Automatization is coming into our agriculture big time, is already in there. Robotics. But the best would be if residents just take their time to be gardeners. I mean, that's the most beautiful thing, right? Because I don't know if our vegetables are better than the ones we buy in the supermarket or so, but I know they taste better for me, right? Because I am a part of that. I'm seeding I'm planting the seeds. I'm watering them and I'm harvesting them, right? I know how much work it is, and therefore I appreciate it much more. So it tastes better. So this one would be the most beautiful thing if residents directly take over that job. Or you have, for example, at the Bosco Verticale in Milan, you have special gardeners, vertical gardeners who take care of plants on buildings. So it would be a new job position, a new job, like a new industry to create. But we are in an age where change is happening.
So one of these towers is being built right now.
For those one, for the Toronto Tree Tower is like it's in the process. It's moving. Yeah.
I think that these projects take quite some time to grow into their kind of equilibrium. It would be an interesting follow-up, to see where they go. I mean, of course, they look noble. On slides and on websites, but I think that the truth of it is that the logistics of maintaining and of like creating that kind of framework is a bit questionable.
Of course, but there are examples, that work, right? Like, for example, the Bosco Verticale. There are other wooden towers at the moment which get constructed, 18 floors wooden structures. So, there is a proven system that already works. And I think that this is, like, we are a generation of first adopters to something new, so it can then take off big time in the future. Yeah.
Okay. Well, time's up, the screen says, but I could, really feel the genuineness in your lecture and in your answers, and I really wish you well for the rest of the projects to come.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.